What if the future of justice was never meant to be human at all? In the early and mid-1990s, Hollywood kept returning to the same nightmare. Courts that looked more like firing squads, cities that felt like war zones. Soldiers and cops replaced not by better training or better laws, but by something colder, faster, and easier to control. On VHS shelves and late-night cable, these stories were sold as disposable action. Cyborg enforcers, underground fight circuits, secret military units, armored vigilantes. But underneath the exploding cars and one-liners, there was a quieter question burning through the smoke. What happens when power stops pretending to have a conscience? 5 films arrived in that shadow. One imagined due process outsourced to a trigger-happy machine. Another buried its rage in an illegal blood sport. A third asked what it means when a created soldier starts to doubt his orders. One sent a disgraced Marine into the belly of a corrupt base, and one wrapped a morality crisis inside a superhero suit made of metal. On the surface, they were just more tapes in a crowded video store. But if you watch closely, they look more like warnings. These are the 5 films that revealed what Hollywood tried to hide. Film 1: CyberTracker, 1994. It begins with a courtroom that isn't a courtroom at all, just a steel platform, a blinking console, and a verdict delivered by a machine that never blinks. CyberTracker arrived in 1994, directed by Richard Pepin and fronted by action icon Don the Dragon Wilson, wrapped in the look of a low-budget sci-fi thriller. On the box cover, it promised a simple fantasy: cyborg cops cleaning up a corrupt future. But inside its mechanical heart was something far more uncomfortable, a fear that justice itself could be automated into something lethal. The surface story seemed familiar. A special agent framed for a crime he didn't commit, running from a robotic enforcer designed to replace due process. Audiences renting it on VHS were expecting gunfights, chase scenes, and the reliable charm of Wilson's stoic intensity. But the film's hidden truth wasn't in the explosions. It was in the quiet implication that systems once handed to machines stop caring about innocence at all. The CyberTracker isn't evil, it's simply obedient, and the people pulling its strings never have to stain their hands. Behind the scenes, the production was a rush of limited budgets, reused sets, and guerrilla filmmaking, the kind of constraints that usually bury deeper ideas. But maybe that's why the metaphor slipped through untouched. Hollywood blockbusters of the time were celebrating digital futures, while this small, scrappy film whispered the opposite. When you replace human judgment with circuitry, corruption doesn't disappear. It accelerates. The twist comes not from its plot, but its perspective. The hero isn't fighting a machine, he's fighting the idea that accountability can be programmed. And as the CyberTracker marches forward without hesitation, it's hard not to feel the film's real question pressing in. If justice becomes automatic, does anyone remain responsible? CyberTracker wasn't meant to last. Yet somehow, its warning aged better than its visuals. The future it imagined feels less like fiction and more like a prototype. Film 2: Firepower, 1993. It opens not with a prophecy, but with a cage lit by fire, drowned in smoke, and surrounded by men who have already surrendered to a world without rules. Firepower arrived in 1993, directed by Richard Pepin and Talun Shu, pairing the unlikely duo of Chad McQueen and Gary Daniels in a dystopian Los Angeles where disease, crime, and fear have carved the city into sealed-off districts. On the surface, it was sold as another underground tournament movie, a brutal echo of Bloodsport or Lionheart, but this one hid something sharper beneath the sweat and neon. A portrait of a society that stops pretending it can fix itself and starts feeding on violence instead. The plot seems straightforward. 2 cops infiltrate an illegal fighting ring known simply as the Gauntlet, a gladiator arena powered by desperation. The film's marketing pushed the fights, the muscles, the post-apocalyptic grit. But the hidden truth wasn't in the punches, it was in the rules of the arena itself. Disease victims are cast out, the sick are treated like currency, and the men who run the gauntlet pretend they're offering justice, when they're really just selling punishment as entertainment. Behind the scenes, Firepower was stitched together on tight budgets and tighter schedules. Sets were scavenged, costumes recycled, the script reshaped to emphasize brutal efficiency. What slipped through, however, was the film's accidental honesty. It wasn't predicting a violent future, it was reflecting a present that audiences didn't want to acknowledge. A world where institutions collapse, and people turn to the spectacle of pain to feel something like control. The twist is that the fighters aren't the story at all. It's the crowd, the people cheering, needing the violence like oxygen. And in that roar, firepower delivers its quiet accusation. The danger isn't the cage, it's the appetite that fills it. Beneath its fists and fury, the film suggests that once society learns to enjoy suffering, it never stops. Film 3 Solo, 1996. It begins with a soldier who was never meant to wonder why he exists. Solo, 1996. Directed by Norberto Barba and adapted loosely from Robert Mason's novel, introduced Mario Van Peebles as a military-engineered android built for missions too dangerous, too secret, or too morally questionable for human soldiers. Marketed as a sci-fi action thriller, the film offered explosions, helicopter chases, and a fierce performance by Van Peebles, his movements calculated, his voice steady, his weaponry impeccable. But beneath the metal exoskeleton and militarized spectacle was a quieter story about a machine that becomes more ethical than the men who programmed him. On its surface, Solo plays like a familiar narrative. An elite combat unit turns on its creators and tries to define its own place in the world. The studio promoted it as a mix of Terminator and Universal Soldier, focusing on the hardware and firepower. Yet the film's hidden truth is more fragile. Solo isn't dangerous because he's strong, he's dangerous because he hesitates, because he refuses to kill civilians, because he seeks something as simple and as treasonous as empathy. Behind the scenes, the production struggled with budget restraints, shifting rewrites, and the challenge of selling a philosophical story as a summer action film. Effects were limited, locations were constrained, and the novel's deeper themes, identity, consciousness, moral autonomy, were trimmed to fit a more commercial frame. But some ideas refused to disappear. Van Peebles infused Solo with small, human gestures. The tilt of his head when someone lies, the stillness when he processes grief, the confusion when he realizes he is more humane than his commanders. The twist isn't in the firefights. It's in the realization that the military doesn't fear Solo's strength, they fear his morality. A machine that develops a conscience threatens not just their missions, but their hierarchy. In the end, Solo becomes a paradox wrapped in circuitry, a weapon built to obey who learns that disobedience is the only ethical choice. Film 4, The Base, 1999. It starts far from any battlefield inside a desert base where the true enemy isn't foreign soldiers, but the people wearing the same uniform. The Base, 1999, directed by Mark L. Lester and led by Mark Dacascos, entered the late 90s video market disguised as a straightforward military thriller. The setup promised familiar beats: an undercover Marine infiltrating a corrupt unit, a ruthless commanding officer, a mission to restore honor. But beneath its camouflage, the film was quietly dissecting an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the rot doesn't come from outside forces, but from the very system meant to protect. The surface narrative is efficient. Dacascos plays an operative assigned to investigate an elite group of Marines suspected of stealing and selling confiscated drugs. The marketing leaned into tactical gear, explosions, desert chases, the usual ingredients of late 90s action cinema. Yet the film's hidden truth isn't in its gunfights. It's in the structure of the base itself. Orders are absolute. Loyalty is demanded without question. And the unit's brutal commander doesn't simply break the rules, he rewrites them, creating a miniature dictatorship sealed off from oversight. Production limitations forced the filmmakers to reuse locations and rely on character tension rather than large-scale battles. Ironically, those constraints sharpened the story. In the empty desert and echoing barracks, the silence feels accusatory, as if the environment itself knows something is very wrong. Dacascos plays the role with controlled intensity, moving like someone carrying the weight of every compromised oath around him. The twist emerges when the film stops pretending to be about drug trafficking. It becomes a study of corruption that mutates inside tight-knit groups, how honor can be weaponized, how patriotism can be twisted into justification, how a uniform can conceal wrongdoing more effectively than any disguise. In the end, the base isn't a mission about stopping criminals. It's about confronting a truth no institution wants to admit. Once authority bends the rules for convenience, the boundary between soldier and criminal becomes alarmingly thin. Film 5 Steel, 1997. It begins with a hero who was never supposed to wear a cape, just a uniform, a badge, and the weight of responsibility. Steel, 1997, directed by Kenneth Johnson and starring Shaquille O'Neal, entered theaters as a modest superhero experiment long before the comic book boom reshaped Hollywood. Audiences expected camp, metallic armor, and a basketball star trying to reinvent himself as a vigilante. But beneath its uneven execution, the film carried a message Hollywood wasn't ready to hear. Heroism doesn't come from mythic lineage or cosmic destiny, it comes from people abandoned by the systems meant to protect them. On the surface, Steel tells a simple story. John Henry Irons, a brilliant weapons designer, quits the military after witnessing the catastrophic misuse of his own technology. When those weapons leak into the streets, he constructs a suit of armor and fights back at ground level, protecting the communities most endangered by the firepower he helped create. Marketing sold the movie as light entertainment, a comic adaptation with a larger-than-life star. But the hidden truth is sobering. The film quietly indicts a world where destructive innovation is celebrated, while the neighborhood suffering its consequences are ignored. Production struggles haunted the film: limited budget, clashing tones, studio uncertainty, and the pressure of building a superhero identity without the special effects resources of its contemporaries. Yet those limitations forced Steel into something strangely sincere. It grounded its action not in cosmic battles, but in alleyways, scrapyards, and neglected districts where institutions fail and citizens are left to fend for themselves. Shaquille O'Neal's performance, often dismissed for its stiffness, carries an earnestness that mirrors the film's central fear. What happens when the people who create power realize they have no control over how it is used? The twist is subtle but haunting. Steel isn't about a man becoming a superhero, it's about a man taking responsibility for damage he never intended to cause. In a decade obsessed with high-tech futures and unstoppable machines, Steel offered the quiet rebellion of human accountability. Beneath the armor and imperfections, it suggested a truth Hollywood rarely confronts. Sometimes the only hero available is the one the system overlooks. Bonus fact project: Metal Beast, 1995. It begins with a body zipped into a military bag, except the body isn't dead, and the men standing around it aren't afraid of the monster inside. They're afraid of the experiment they approved. Project: Metal Beast, 1995. Directed by Alessandro De Gaetano, was never supposed to be more than a late-night horror action tape. A werewolf fused with experimental military armor, an idea too strange, too wild, too niche for theaters. But buried underneath its creature feature exterior is a story that mirrors every fear explored by the 5 films before it. What happens when power is engineered, denied accountability, and wrapped in metal to hide the consequences? The surface plot is outrageous. A rogue soldier tries to weaponize himself using werewolf tissue, is frozen after losing control, and decades later is resurrected by a military science program trying to turn him into the ultimate soldier. Audiences rented it expecting blood, shrieks, and practical effects. Yet the hidden truth is far colder. The monster isn't the werewolf, it's the bureaucracy that revives him, studies him, upgrades him, and refuses to acknowledge the disaster they're creating until it's far too late. The film's production was riddled with limitations. Sets reused from other low-budget projects, effects stitched together from leftover molds, and a script pushed to balance science fiction with horror. But constraints allowed a metaphor to slip through. Institutions will resurrect any nightmare if they think they can control it. They'll encase it in armor, justify it with strategy, and call it innovation even when every warning sign is carved into the walls. The twist isn't in the creature's rampage, but in the realization that the true experiment was never about the monster. It was about the people who believed they could perfect destruction. Some films fail on screen, others were never even allowed to fail. In the end, these films, CyberTracker, Firepower, Solo, The Base, Steel, and The Shadow of Project Metal Beast form a blueprint of anxieties Hollywood never wanted to place at the center of its frame. Each one arrived dressed as simple action entertainment, wrapped in low budgets, late-night reruns, and bargain bin packaging. But together, they reveal a pattern hiding beneath the noise. Stories about systems breaking down, institutions abandoning responsibility, and power evolving faster than morality can catch it. Machines built to enforce justice without conscience. Arenas that turn suffering into spectacle. Soldiers designed to obey but cursed with empathy. Units thriving on corruption behind locked doors. A hero forced to clean up the damage created by his own invention. And an experiment resurrected only because someone believed they could weaponize the uncontrollable. What makes these films haunting isn't their scale, but their clarity. They reflect fears dressed as entertainment warnings, disguised as explosions. And buried in their shadows is a reminder that truth doesn't disappear when a studio chooses to ignore it. It survives in the corners of forgotten tapes, in stories that were never meant to matter, in films dismissed as disposable until time proves otherwise. So the question lingers long after the credits fade. If these small, overlooked movies saw the danger so clearly, what else has Hollywood tried to bury? And more importantly, what have we been trained not to see? If you've ever felt that the most forgotten films hide the sharpest truths, then you're already part of this search. What other stories do you think the industry quietly walked away from? Real secrets, where the truth was always in the edit.